Hi, and welcome to Why Do Countries Exist, an episode on Bulgarian political parties. So thank you for listening in. Today I'm going to talk about political parties in Bulgaria. Today's episode was requested by Sir Aranis on YouTube. If you want me to make a video on another country's political parties, just let me know via email or in the comments, and I'll get around to it at some point. I'm currently planning on making an episode on Slovak, Canadian, and British parties. So Bulgaria recently had an election of April of this year, but they are actually going to have another election on July 11th. Why are they having another election? Well, in July of last year, many in Bulgaria began protesting government corruption in the country. Bulgaria is probably one of the most corrupt countries in Europe, and corruption within the government has been a problem for a very long time. So in the context of these massive protests against the government, they had an election. 6 different political blocs got into the legislature, and what I'm going to call the 3 anti-corruption blocs, ITN, DB, and ISMV, declared that they wouldn't work with any parties who were corrupt. Well, there's a lot of corrupt parties, so this pretty much made forming a government impossible with the seat numbers each party currently had. So another election has been declared, and hopefully a government can be formed out of this one. The election that is taking place is for the legislature of the country, the National Assembly. The National Assembly is made up of 240 legislators, who are elected via proportional representation. So, if Party A wins 20% of the vote, they should win roughly 20% of the seats. Bulgaria has a 4% electoral threshold, meaning in order for a party to enter the National Assembly, they have to win 4% of the total vote. The National Assembly will elect the Prime Minister and their government, along with writing laws and regulations. Bulgaria is also a member of the EU, and sends 17 members to the EU Parliament. And finally, one more thing before I begin. I am not Bulgarian, so my pronunciations for this episode are going to be terrible, so apologies in advance. So the first party we will talk about is the Grazdevina za Isprokina za Bulgarina. I'm just going to put the Google Translate on. Or in English, Citizens for European Development of Bulgaria, or GERB. GERB is a conservative party, and was the ruling party people were protesting against. GERB gets a lot of support among people who oppose the protests, along with support among the middle class, those in rural areas in the west, along with receiving good but not amazing numbers from the east and in some urban areas as well. The party won 73 seats in the April election, and sends 5 members to the EU Parliament, where they sit in the European People's Party group. The party is headed by Boyko Borisov, the former mayor of Sofia, and he was the prime minister of the country until just May 12th, when an interim prime minister took over. I sadly couldn't find GERB's website. It seemed to be down, and they didn't respond to my Facebook message, so this section is sadly going to be pretty short and vague. Borisov has historically fought for infrastructure reform, and moving Bulgaria towards an energy sector with greater government involvement, along with generally opposing taxes, I think, and for strengthening the army and police forces in the country. GERB is also pro-EU, and has historically made a big deal about trying to crack down on corruption. However, while they have said they want to crack down on corruption, it seems that for many they have either largely outright failed, or, if you ask some, have actively aided the Bulgarian Mafia and encouraged nepotism to run rampant. They have been in government almost non-stop since 2009, and yet Bulgaria is still one of the most corrupt and one of the worst off countries in the EU economically, along with an alarming level of Bulgarians fleeing the country. You could maybe make the argument that GERB has improved Bulgaria, or at least prevented things from getting any worse, but that doesn't really sell in an election when large segments of the population are either in poverty, or just barely above poverty. Borisov in particular has also been accused of directly being corrupt and degrading media freedom. Also, on the topic of Borisov, one of the things that got people up in arms with him and made people angry was a picture that showed Borisov naked in his room with a gun and money next to him. I think it's kind of funny that somehow this picture managed to be taken, but maybe I'm missing some context because I don't really see why this would be a problem. In the pictures I've seen, it just looked like the man sleeping, so I don't really understand what the problem would be, but what the hell do I know? Maybe I'm missing some important context. GERB also has a small ally party associated with it, or Union of Democratic Forces, or SDS. The SDS is another conservative and Christian democratic party, with it formerly being one of the largest parties in the country right after the fall of communism. It has shrunk over the years, but still sees some success, and since the 2019 EU elections, has worked closely with GERB. The party won 2 seats in the election in April, and sends 1 member to EU Parliament, where they sit in the European People's Party group. It is headed by Rumen Histrov, a former Minister of Agriculture. SDS supports a flat tax, wants to increase education spending, wants to privatize the healthcare sector, wants to reduce the number of unregulated landfills in the country, wants to create a Ministry of Tourism, back self-defense laws, and wants to incentivize increasing the birth rate in Bulgaria. It also is pro-EU and pro-NATO, and supports e-democracy in the country. It seems to hold fairly socially conservative views such as opposing pride festivals for encouraging homosexuality and guilting straight families. Or at least, I think that's what they're saying. I am using Google Translate, so maybe their translation is wrong. The next party is
Има такъв народ.
or There Is Such People, or ITN. ITN is the populist party, forming the largest of the new anti-corruption blocs. This election was the first election it ever participated in, and it received a lot of support among those who backed the protest, the Bulgarian diaspora, and the north and central of the country. It won 51 seats in the April election. It is headed by Slavi Trifonov, a folk musician and TV show host. ITN wants to move power away from the political elites in the country, and move towards a system that better responds to regular citizens. It is a strong supporter of referendum, compulsory voting, and has talked about introducing e-democracy in the country. It wants to alter the political system in the country, reducing the number of legislators in the country, and moving away from the proportional system, and introducing a 2-round first-past-the-post system, or in other words, the electoral system they have in France, the state of Georgia, or many presidential elections around the world. It also is pro-EU, but doesn't believe in alienating Russia, hoping for a middle course between the two. Critics of ITN largely seem to point to the fact that Trifonov is inexperienced and hasn't actually held any political office. They draw similarities to GERB, which was also elected on a platform of cleaning up the country, and they still ended up where they are today. Some people fear that ITN will go down the same road, and will just become another party of broken promises. Although, admittedly, despite this hesitation, the party has been doing very well in the polls, and looks set to increase its vote share. Some have also criticized Trifonov for not taking COVID seriously. Next, we go to the
Българска социалистическа партия.
or the Bulgarian Socialist Party, or BSP. The BSP is the main center-left party in the country, with it holding social democratic views. The party is seen partially as a continuation of the former ruling Communist Party of the country, with many civil servants from the communist era backing the party. It also receives support from pensioners, trade unionists, the center of the country, and receives a decent amount of support from the Romani minority. The party won 42 seats in April, and sends 5 members to the EU Parliament, where they sit in the Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats. The party is headed by Cornelia Ninova, a member of the National Assembly. Also, fun fact, Ninova supposedly said that Margaret Thatcher is her favorite politician, which is quite a take to have when you are a part of a left-wing party. The current president of Bulgaria, Rumen Radev, while not a member of the BSP, was elected with BSP support. BSP backs a social market economy, opposing excessive privatization and wanting strong government involvement in the economy, while also still allowing companies and multinational firms to play a very large role in the country. It generally tends to back increased government spending on education, welfare, and pensions. BSP is in favor of European integration, but also holds some more positive views towards Russia, opposing EU sanctions on Russia, and encouraging economic partnerships between the two. BSP was one of the many parties and organizations that backed the protests last year, but this hasn't earned BSP many friends, as they themselves have widely been accused of corruption and allowing oligarchs to take control when they were in charge. So their criticisms towards GERB can ring kind of hollow. They also tend to be hated by those on the right for being seen as a continuation of the Communist Party. Many former communists back the party, and you can regularly see right-wing Bulgarians calling BSP-led governments and coalitions as just outright communist. Communist rule in Bulgaria was ended in 1990, after protests in the country complaining of political repression, forced expulsion of the Turkish minority in the country, and just general mismanagement of Bulgaria. Speaking of communism, the BSP is also allied to the small
Комунистическа партия на България.
or the Communist Party of Bulgaria, or KPB. The Communist Party is, unsurprisingly, supportive of communism. and was formed to oppose the neoliberal reforms taking place in the country in the 90s. The party is aligned with other communist parties, such as the Communist Party of Greece, the Communist Party of China, the Communist Party of Vietnam, and the Communist Party of Cuba by its affiliation with the IMCWP. The party won one seat in April, which is held by party leader Alexander Pulnov. After that we have or Movements for Rights and Freedoms, or DPS. DPS is a liberal party, representing the interests of the Turkish and Romani community. The vast majority of support comes from these two communities, and it gets very little backing among ethnic Bulgarians. It has a stronghold in the northeast and south of the country. It won 30 seats in April, and sends 3 members to the EU Parliament, where they sit in the Renew Europe group. The party is headed by Mustafa Karadayar, a member of the National Assembly. DPS supports the interests of Turks and Romani in the country, opposing racism against these communities, wants to open up job opportunities for Turks and Romanis, opposes populist rhetoric, and backs close ties with Turkey. It supports increased cooperation between parties, with the party historically acting as a centrist party, and serving as a coalition partner between several different right and left-leaning governments. The party also generally supports neoliberal economics, although they have opposed privatizing firms and companies largely employed by ethnic Turks. While DPS is not explicitly a party for minorities in Bulgaria, it de facto acts that way, which has led to tension between it and many right-wingers and nationalists in the country, who see the party as acting as either a proxy for Turkey or as creating division in Bulgaria. The party also has been accused of being yet another corrupt party, often not holding very strong political positions, and willing to abandon those positions in order to get into a coalition with really any party. Also, if you know the video of the guy going to assassinate the politician on stage, but his gun misfires and then he gets beat up, the guy he was going to assassinate was a member of the party. We have another group of liberals with Demokratična Bulgaria, that one was more easy for me to pronounce, or Democratic Bulgaria, or DB. DB is a coalition of 3 parties: Democrats for a Strong Bulgaria, Yes Bulgaria, and the Green Movement. All 3 of these parties vary a bit on their positions, but they all tend to back broadly liberal policies, and being strongly anti-corruption, with DB being one of the new anti-corruption blocs. It gets support from those who back the protests, and gets a lot of support from urban areas, especially in Sofia and Plovdiv. It won 27 seats in April, and Democrats for a Strong Bulgaria sends 1 member to EU Parliament, who sits in the European People's Party group. The coalition is headed by Atanas Atanasov, a member of the National Assembly, and Hristo Ivanov, the former Minister of Justice. DB wants to crack down on corruption by eliminating oligarch-controlled media and bringing about a free press, stripping politicians of full immunity and judicial reform. It backs free market economics, supporting the protection of private property, encouraging economic growth and investment, and wants to decrease taxes. They also support renewable energy, backs increasing investment into education and technology, is strongly pro-EU, supports LGBTQ rights, and seemingly supports increased border security. I suspect one of the main criticisms towards DB might be that people fear they aren't anti-corruption enough. Democrats for Bulgaria had previously served in a coalition with GERB, and I think there might be some people who worry that DB might join a GERB-led coalition and not really fight corruption present in the country, or that the reforms that they argue for won't actually solve the problem of deep-rooted corruption in Bulgaria. Finally, the last of the anti-corruption bloc, and the last bloc to win seats in April, is Iprava Mise Mutrivan, or Stand Up, Mafia, Get Out, which is a great name for a political party, or ISMV. ISMV is a coalition of 7 parties that range from populist, conservatives, social democrats, and European federalists, and they all stand opposed to corruption in the country. It gets a lot of support from the city of Sofia and the southeast of the country. It won 14 seats in April, and while it doesn't send any member to EU Parliament, one of its coalition members is a part of the Pan-European Volt Europa Party, which does have an MEP from Germany who sits in the Green/Europe Free Alliance group. ISMV is headed by Maya Manova, the former National Ombudsman. ISMV is similar to other anti-corruption parties, in that it wants to reduce the power from the corrupt ruling elite. It wants to crack down on monopolies, supports more referendums, and wants large judicial reform. It also backs measures designed to increase the birth rate of the country, supports greater investment into renewable energy, is strongly pro-EU, wants to increase pension spending, backs decentralizing the tax budget for greater regional control, backs building up the country's infrastructure, and wants to increase the digitization of voting and government services. Now, with three different anti-corruption blocs who all roughly share the same goals, it might be important to ask, why don't they all work together? In many ways, the fact that they all haven't banded together weakens the anti-corruption movement. There are several smaller anti-corruption parties that participated in the last election but failed to enter parliament due to not getting enough votes to pass the electoral threshold. If all of these anti-corruption parties banded together, maybe they could have won enough seats to get a big enough bloc in the legislature to actually win the election. But they haven't due to personal disagreements and infighting, which weakens the movement. All of that really is to say that I suspect that there might be a general sense that many parties, not only in the anti-corruption bloc, but really just in Bulgaria in general, don't actually care about making political change, or helping the people in the country, and are largely just in it for the comfy job, the fame, and some kickbacks. The last party I'll really go in depth in didn't win a single seat in April, but was a part of the former ruling coalition with GERB and holds seats in the EU Parliament. Or IMRO, Bulgarian National Movement, is a Bulgarian nationalist and right-wing populist party. It is the most right-wing of the parties I have talked about so far, and is often characterized as being far-right. It receives most of its support seemingly from rural areas and in the east and west. It sends 2 members to EU Parliament, where they sit in the European Conservative and Reformist group. The party is currently headed by Karisar Karakachanov, the former Minister of Defense. IMRO holds strong nationalistic views towards just about everything. The party believes in connecting all ethnic Bulgarians together and maintaining ties across the world. This means fighting for the rights of Bulgarian minorities in other countries, especially North Macedonia, which some more radical members of the party will argue belongs within the Bulgarian state. It also wants ethnic Bulgarians to return to Bulgaria itself and encourages increasing the birth rate, along with arguing for the Bulgarian Orthodox Church to be made the state religion of the country, protecting and preserving Bulgaria's natural beauty, decentralization of the state, and promoting Bulgarian-owned businesses. It has an interesting position on the EU, with it not opposing Bulgaria's entry into the EU, unlike most other nationalistic groups in Europe, and actually arguing for increased funds into the country. However, it also strongly opposes increased political integration with other EU states, and wants Bulgaria to heavily control and use EU funds to benefit just the nation of Bulgaria, and not necessarily the EU as a whole. IMRO's nationalism has led many to label them as chauvinistic, homophobic, and racist. On their website you can find pages calling homosexuality a mental disease, having a page on their website called The Gypsy Question, regularly calling for Bulgaria to take a hostile approach towards Turkey, and wanting to reduce immigration into the country. The IMRO would probably argue that these positions are just about protecting the Bulgarian state from foreign enemies, but it still leads to some seeing the party as far too extreme. There also has been criticism towards the party for siding with the government during the latest protests, which might be why the party failed to win any seats in April. They currently are polling at around 4%, so it's probably a 50-50 chance on them entering the legislature in July. So those are all the major parties, but with the election just around the corner, I thought I'd mention some other parties running for office. I don't think any of them are currently polling to get elected, but who knows, maybe one of these smaller parties, or even IMRO, will win some seats. Speaking of the IMRO, 2 other nationalist parties that were formerly a part of the ruling coalition, Voya and the National Front for the Salvation of Bulgaria, are working with IMRO in the election in July, which might be enough to get IMRO back into parliament. There are actually a lot of nationalist parties running, such as ATTAC, another nationalist party that was formerly a part of the ruling coalition, Revival, a nationalist party that backed the protest, and the Bulgarian National Union/New Democracy, a neo-Nazi party. There are also several breakoffs of larger parties, like Republicans for Bulgaria, which was a breakoff of GERB, and Alternative for Bulgarian Revival, which was a breakoff of the BSP. Finally, some other parties are the Socialist Bulgarian Left, the Environmentalist Green Party for Bulgaria, the Conservative Association of the Right, and several parties advocating for direct democracy, like the Direct Democracy Party. So that ends this episode on Bulgarian political parties. If you are from Bulgaria, I hope it was accurate, or at least mostly accurate, with my look into these parties. And I hope you vote on the 11th and elect a government that works well for you. If you're not from Bulgaria, I hope you enjoy. I mean, I guess I also hope you enjoy if you are from Bulgaria, but yeah. Thank you for listening. So the next episode is going to be on Slovak political parties, and then I'll do my main country episode on the history of Bhutan, and then an episode on Canadian parties, and then British parties. Again, if you want me to do an episode on a certain country's political parties, just comment, send me an email or a carrier pigeon, and I'll try to get to it at some point. But thank you for watching/listening. You can email me at whydocountries@gmail.com for your thoughts, comments, suggestions, or hate mail. Take care. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.